The Arizona desert, a strange and hostile environment, but filled with a surprising abundance of life. This is the story of one inhabitant's mastery of his desert domain. The rattlesnake. The life and death of a Western gladiator. He was born on a summer morning in the Arizona desert. 3 others were born with him, another male and 2 females. Each was about 10 inches long. He had no arms or legs. His skin was delicate. His tiny brain was very dull. Nearly everything that walked on the ground or burrowed in it, that flew in the air or swam in the water or climbed trees, was his enemy. But he didn't know that. He knew nothing at all. He was aware of his own existence, and that was the sum of his knowledge. He was, of course, a baby rattlesnake, a desert diamondback named Crotalus atrox by the herpetologists Baird and Gerard, and so listed in the Catalog of North American Reptiles in its issue of 1853. Their mother left them a few hours after they were born. A day after that, his brothers and sisters left him also. Little Crotalus lay in a neat coil and watched them go. Young Crotalus' brother was the last of the litter to go out into the world and the first to die. He achieved a distance of 50 feet from his birthplace when a raccoon came upon him. The little rattler, despite his poison fangs, was a tidbit. One of Crotalus' little sisters managed to live for almost 2 full days. She was taken as an appetizer for a hungry coyote on the prowl for bigger game. Nemesis of the second sister was a chaparral cock, known as a roadrunner in this part of the country. Crotalus, dozing in a rocky crevice, neither knew nor cared. Even if he had, there was nothing he could have done about it. He was all alone. Nobody cared whether he lived or died. On the 4th day of his life, he decided to go out into the world himself. Snake fashion, Crotalus rippled forth, the transverse plates on his belly serving him as legs. He did not know where he was going, for he had never been anywhere before. Hunger was probably his prime mover. He could see things well enough within his limited range. He had no ears and heard no sounds as other animals hear, but his lower jaw was sensitive to vibration. Thus, he heard certain sounds in his own way. The direct rays of the sun could, in a short time, kill him. If the temperature dropped too low, he would freeze. Without food, he would starve. Without moisture, he would die of dehydration. If anything chased him, he could run neither very far nor very fast. His best defense was to remain undetected. Thus it was at the hour of his birth. Thus it would be, with modifications, all his life. But against these drawbacks, he had certain qualifications that fitted him to be a competitive creature of this world and equipped him for his warfare. He could exist a long time without food or water. He had a wonderful tongue. It looked like an exposed nerve. It was probably exactly that. It was forked, and Crotalus thrust it in and out as he traveled. This tongue pulled in tiny particles of matter, and thus served as an organ of smell. He also had a pit, a deep pockmark between eye and nostril. Unique, this organ was sensitive to animal heat. In pitch blackness, Crotalus, by means of the heat messages recorded in his pit, could tell whether another animal was near and could judge its size. Instinct provided him with what he lacked in experience. In order to satisfy his hunger, he had to find something smaller than himself and kill it. He came upon a young mouse. Eyes, nose, pit, and tongue told Crotalus that his first meal was waiting for him. Instinct told him what it was and what to do. From sacs in his jaws, he secreted a virulent poison, which he could inject with his two hollow and pointed fangs. His venom killed the mouse. His poison was odorless and tasteless. It worked on the blood. The more poison he injected with a bite, the more dangerous the wound. The pain was instantaneous, and the shock accompanying it was profound. Injected directly into a large vein, his poison brought death quickly, for his victim died when it reached his heart. He then took his dead prey and proceeded to swallow it whole. One day, while he was still a very young snake, a large black and white creature approached him in a very curious manner. It was a striped skunk, and he was sniffing the ground for anything he could eat. Crotalus lay quietly flattened against the ground. Perhaps this threat to his continued existence would pass him by unnoticed. The single button on his tail could not, of course, yet rattle. Crotalus wouldn't be able to rattle until that button had grown into 3 segments. Then he would be able to buzz. But if he became the dinner for this fat skunk, he would never live long enough to grow a decent set of rattles. When he found that evasive action would not save him, he was forced to fall back on his defenses. He struck swiftly. There was not yet enough poison in his tiny bite to kill the skunk, but it was enough to discourage him. Without his fangs and poison, he would have been among the most helpless creatures on Earth. With them, he was among the deadliest. During his first 2 years, Crotalus grew rapidly. Periodically, his eyes clouded over until he could not see. His pit and his nostril ceased to function. His skin thickened and dried. It was time to shed his old skin, and instinct told him how to do it. By nosing against a rock, he forced the old skin down over his head, bunching it like a rolled stocking around his neck. Then, he pushed around the rocks, literally crawling out of the skin by slow degrees. Wriggling free at last, he looked like a brand new snake. His skin was bright and satiny. His eyes and nostrils were clear. His pit sang with sensation. With each new molting, a new segment was added to his castanet of rattles. He was a magnificent reptile. Not a single scar defaced his rippling symmetry. He was diabolically beautiful and deadly poisonous. At 4, he had grown to the size where desert dwellers like coyotes knew it was better to leave him alone. The mighty seasonal rhythms of the desert were as vast pulsations, and like all other forms of life, the lives of the rattlesnakes were attuned to them. The winter brought hibernation. The plants slowed their growth, and the snakes remained burrowed in their dens. Spring sun beat down. Occasional spring rains fell, and the plants opened forth and budded. The desert was thus repopulated. The den opened too, and the snakes crawled forth. The peach tree does not know when it is time to flower, but flower it does, because its cycle orders it to do so. In the same way, Crotalus did not know when it was time for young desert diamondback rattlers to pair off and breed, but his cycle knew. He found her on a sunny morning. Crotalus' courtship was sinuous and subtle, slow and stealthy. Two metabolic machines united to produce new metabolic machines. Of the physical union, 6 new rattlesnakes were born, but Crotalus had not stayed nearby to see them. He went back to the business of his own life. Thus, Crotalus, at the age of 4, had experienced everything that was reasonably possible for desert diamondback rattlesnakes to experience, except death. He had not experienced death for the simple reason that there had never been an opportunity for anything bigger and stronger than himself to kill him. But what about the years to come? Crotalus had attained a length of 4 feet. His tail had 8 rattles on it and its button. He rarely bothered with mice anymore, preferring rats and squirrels. Because of his slow locomotion, he could not run down these agile little things. He had to contrive instead to be where they were when they would pass. Then he struck swiftly, injected his poison and swallowed them whole after they died. He grew more slowly in the years following his initial spurt. At the age of 20, Crotalus was nearly 6 feet long and weighed about 8 pounds. Few of the others were larger than he. His rattle now had many segments. It had been broken off occasionally in the past, but with each new molting, a new segment appeared. In the autumn, the plants began to close their growing season. And in like manner, by instinct, The rattlers knew when it was time to gather together in their den. The den was their refuge from the cold of winter. There they slept until called forth by a new spring. The particular group of rattlers from which Crotalus had come had lived here for scores of years. The members did nothing at all for each other except breed. They hunted singly. They never shared their food. They derived some automatic degree of safety from their numbers, but their actions were never concerted toward using their numbers to any end. If an enemy attacked one of them, the others did nothing about it. At the age of 20, Crotalus was the oldest and largest rattler in his den. His whole world was only about a mile in radius. He had fixed places where he avoided the sun when it was hot. He knew his hunting grounds thoroughly. He was a fine old machine, perfectly adapted to his surroundings. He dominated his little world. He was in the golden age of his viperhood. But men were approaching. Spilling out of their cities, men were settling in that part of the desert where Crotalus lived. They built roads and houses. They homesteaded the land. The roads they built were death traps for the desert dwellers. They brought alien animals with them. One German shepherd had been reared on a farm in the Midwest, and there had gained the reputation of being a snake killer. Black snakes, garter snakes, pilots, water snakes. Its instinctive response was to kill them all. This dog met Crotalus face to face in the desert. Crotalus had seen coyotes aplenty and feared them not. Neither did the dog fear Crotalus, although this snake buzzed and buzzed and buzzed. The dog was brave, and a snake was a snake. Crotalus struck him, and his fangs squirted big blobs of poison into the dog. The shepherd attacked again. He tried to shake him, as in the past he had shaken slender black snakes to their death. But the poison had its effect. In sick, agonizing bewilderment, he crawled somehow back to his master's homestead and died. The homesteader felt if there was a snake around big enough to kill a dog that size, it could also kill a child, and probably a man. It was something that had to be eliminated. The homesteader enlisted the aid of his fellow farmers. They agreed to initiate a war of extermination against the snakes. The campaign during the summer was sporadic. The snakes were scattered all over the desert, and it was only by chance that the men came upon them. Even so, at summer's end, quite a few of the vipers had been killed. When autumn came, the men decided to look for the rattler's den. The homesteaders had become desert-wise and knew what to look for. They found Crotalus' lair without too much trouble, a rock outcropping on a large slope that faced the south. Convenient benches and shelves of rock were at hand, where the snakes might lie for a final sunning in the autumn air. They killed the 3 rattlers they found at the den when they first discovered it. They made plans to return in a few more days when more of the snakes had gathered. They decided to bring along dynamite with them and blow up the mouth of the cave so that the snakes within would be sealed there forever and the snakes without would have no place to find refuge. On the day the men chose to return, nearly 50 desert diamondbacks had been gathered at the portals of the cave. The men shot some and scared the others back into the cave. Then they lit the fuse. Crotalus had not yet arrived for the autumn rendezvous. He came later that day. The den's mouth was a shattered mass of rock, for the men had done their dynamiting well. Dead members of his tribe lay everywhere. Crotalus nosed among them, tongue flicking as he slid slowly along. There was no access to the cave anymore. He had spent the night outside among the dead. He lay there at full length in the morning sun. He had no place to go. The sun grew hotter upon him, and instinctively he began to slide toward some protective shade. Then his senses warned him of some animal presence nearby. He stopped, half-coiled, raised his head and began to rattle. He saw 2 upright figures. He did not know what they were because he had never seen the species before. At 20 years of age, Crotalus had lost his last battle, the battle of encroaching civilization.